welcome to Cooking with Countryside. Today we are going to be making Buttercup Squash Muffins. And you may be like, squash muffins? That sounds kind of strange. But think it's just like zucchini bread, but with buttercup squash. So this is our buttercup squash. This is the first ingredient you'll need from the market. You will also need an apple, and you can choose any variety you would like. You'll need some eggs, all-purpose flour, and today I am using spelt flour, and honey or maple syrup as a sweetener. The additional ingredients you'll need from your pantry are baking powder, baking soda, white sugar, vegetable oil, and cinnamon. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to cook the buttercup squash. So now that this is all peeled, I'm just going to cut it into quarters to get out the seeds. So as you can see, just like every other squash, there's some nice seeds in there. We're gonna cut them into cubes in the end, so anything you can save that. And then anything else that has seeds in it, you can compost. So now I'm just gonna take all my squash and dice it up. And then I'm gonna throw it in boiling water on the stove for about 10 minutes or until it's fork tender. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to mix all the dry ingredients in one bowl. So we're gonna start with 2 cups of your flour. And then next we are going to do 1/2 cup of white sugar. And then we're gonna do 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And then if you'd like to add a little bit of salt, you can do 1 teaspoon of that. It's the only kind of salt that we have at our house, so that'll have to work. And then a little bit of cinnamon as well, wherever that's hiding. We're gonna do about 1 teaspoon of that. I might add a little bit extra because I love the taste of cinnamon and I think it's gonna go really nicely with the squash. So we're gonna go ahead and just mix this up. And just make sure everything gets well combined so you don't bite into your muffin and get a chunk of baking soda or baking powder. Because I am the queen of leaving chunks of those and it is not fun. Your mouth goes a little bit numb when you take that bite, so give it a good stir. And then in a separate bowl, we're going to do the wet ingredients. So for the wet ingredients, the first order of business is making that squash puree. So I just took my squash that I boiled out and I drained the water. And if you roast it, it's gonna be the same process. You can either like use a masher like this and just mash it up, or you could use a fork, or if you have like a handheld mixer, that would work great as well. And just mash it up into a puree. We're only going to need 1 cup of this. So if you have extra, you can either choose to set that aside so you're not mashing at all, or you could add a little bit of butter and cinnamon to it and eat it as a side dish as well. And I forgot to mention this, but now would be a great time to preheat your oven to 350. So in a separate bowl, we are going to measure out 1 cup of puree. Okay, so there we have our cup of puree. I'm just gonna dump that in and set the rest to the side. And now we're going to add 1/4 cup of honey, and you could also use maple syrup for this. I'm not really gonna measure it out. This is just gonna help sweeten it, so we used a little bit less white sugar than some other recipes that are similar to this, just because honey adds a nice touch of flavor to it that you won't get from the white sugar, and then you can cut down on that sugar amount. But if you are foregoing honey, I would increase the white sugar by about a 1/4 cup. So the next thing, we need a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. So I know this is not a liquid measuring cup, but I'm just gonna estimate one less dish to do. And then we need 2 eggs, which are beautiful. You can crack those right in here. And then the last ingredient, we are actually going to grate an apple and we're gonna add it to this wet ingredients. So this is gonna add a nice extra flavor in there. So you can use any kind of apple you want. And actually, instead of grating it, which you could grate it as normal, I think I'm going to use a food processor and just chop it up real small. Now you could make them into larger chunks if you wanted to see the actual pieces of apple in your muffins, but I'm going to make them really small so it just kind of integrates right into the bread. So I'll get out my little food processor here that matches my shirt, and I'm gonna have to do 2 batches, but that's okay. So this is about as fine as I can get it. Ideally, I would like it a little bit smaller, so that's when grating would come in. But you know what? We're just gonna stick with this and see how it turns out. And I'm just gonna repeat that process with the remainder of my apple. So now all my wet ingredients are in one bowl, and I'm going to mix them all up. Okay, so you definitely, if you have a hand mixer, now would be a great time to use it. You wanna make sure that that egg yolk gets broken up and that everything gets incorporated. And it smells really good, that squash, especially if it's still hot and you had just cooked it. You'll start to smell it and it smells so, so good. And it's a beautiful orange color. I would tip this over, but every time I do that on camera, it falls. So this is kind of the consistency it is, all mixed together. Those apples, definitely there are a little bit of chunks in there, which is perfectly fine. So the next step is just to kind of fold everything together. So you could use a whisk for this, or you could use a rubber spatula, which the rubber spatula will probably be a little bit easier. So if you want to make a well in the middle of the flour, you can do that. Add a little bit, or you can just add the whole thing. And then we're gonna mix it up until all the flour is incorporated, but you don't need to mix it really beyond that. So just until everything's combined. And then when you're done with this, or at any point in the process really, you can prepare a muffin pan. So you can either spray it or put the papers in. This will make about a dozen muffins. So at this point, everything is combined, a nice batter like that. Hopefully that doesn't look disgusting on camera, but it smells really good, like I said earlier. So I'm just gonna get rid of some of this stuff and we'll fill our muffin tin. So I chose to line mine with papers because it's not non-stick. And I'm just gonna take a spoon and start filling this up. And I would just distribute this evenly among your muffin holders, your individual muffins. I'm not really sure the technical term. Filling them up about 2/3 of the way full. And if you're cooking with kids, this was always my favorite step when I was younger. So this is great because even the really little kiddos can do this step. I always lose some on the side, and that's okay. We can scrape that off after, because if you leave it on your tin, as we all know, it'll burn a little bit on top there, which isn't really a problem. It's just a pain to scrape off when you go to clean it. And it looks like I'm actually gonna have enough batter to probably make 1.5 dozen. So you could either fill up your tin a little bit more or make some extra on the side, Or alternatively, instead of making muffins, you can make this into a loaf of bread. So I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of wipe off the stuff that got on the tin as much as I can. And then we're gonna go ahead, pop these in the oven at 350 and bake for 25 minutes or until you insert a toothpick and it comes out clean. So after about 25 minutes, you can take your muffins out and remove them from the pan and let them cool. And then if you're not eating them right away, store them in an airtight container. And they are really yummy, so even though muffins, I traditionally associate them with breakfast, I think they're perfect for a snack or to supplement your lunch or even as a dessert. So if you're interested in learning how you can make muffins like these with ingredients from local farms here in Ohio, visit countrysidefoodandfarms.org. Thank you for watching and enjoy!